Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by Joe Fordyce, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer. Joe, we are going to finish off our Predicting the Lineup series with goaltending. Have we talked about that enough, Joe?
I think we've talked about it a little bit. I mean, it's not that big of a topic here in Philadelphia, but I think we've touched on it a couple times.
Just a couple of times. So let's get into it. Joe, this is obviously a very polarizing position, particularly right now for the Flyers as they try to take a step in the rebuild. On opening night, come October, what do you think the tandem will look like and why?
Well, I don't remember which podcast it was where we talked about this, but I think if the tandem doesn't start with Ersson, then they have bigger issues than we think even right now. Because if he doesn't show enough in camp to be the starter on opening night and Dan Vladar's the starter, I think there's a big issue going forward with Sam Ersson in this franchise. He's in a contract year. You would figure he would get the benefit of the doubt, having gone through the last 2+ seasons here. So if he's not the opening night starter and it's not an injury, I mean, that could always change everything. But if he's not the opening night starter and it's not due to injury, I think this team has bigger goaltending problems than they already have. So I anticipate it being Ersson with Dan Vladar as the backup.
That's what I have as well, and I couldn't agree more. I think if Ersson's not the number one on opening night, I think it's probably because he severely underperformed in the preseason and Vladar kind of blew the door down. I do think the Flyers want Vladar to really come in and compete to try to win the number one job. But I think we all know this is going to be a tandem, and Ersson, I think, is still going to be the guy. If they have to pick one to start opening night, it'll be him. And it's just interesting that Vladar has the most security of all the goalies right now in the goaltending picture with a 2-year deal.
Yeah, it's to call their goaltending situation interesting is an interesting term for it. I think others would use harsher terms for it. Some probably not suitable for this this platform, but I think the opening night assignment is a message. And while they may end up playing equal amount of games, Ersson has to be the starter opening night. To me, if there's any hope for future of him with this franchise, because as you said, if it's not due to injury and he's not the opening night starter, it has to do with performance and underperformance in a preseason that's really a small sample size. So I think Ersson would really, really have to underperform to not be that opening night starter. And like we said, even if there is, and we figure the plan is probably, I don't know, 60-40, if not 50-50 between these two goaltenders. Opening night's a different animal, though. And to me, the home opener is a different animal, too. Mm-hmm. So I expect that Ersson will be the starter for both of those games. And there's issues if he's not.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have said the big thing with him is consistency because we've seen it in flashes. It's not like a matter of can he actually do it. He's done it before. I think the huge thing will be can he do it over the course of a full season because he is simply worn down the stretch and hasn't shown he could do it from start to finish.
And I think that's the Dan Vladar thing is that when we've seen Ersson at his best, it's been when he doesn't have the pressure to play upwards of 50+ games, or even 60. I mean, this is a guy that got thrown into the fire the second he came to the Flyers. Injuries, Carter Hart injuries, then the Carter Hart legal situation. It's nothing's really been normal for him. And really, I mean, that is not making an excuse in any way because I find that few things involving goaltenders are ever normal. I mean, just look at the Stanley Cup Finals last year. You had teams playing. Well, you had one team playing multiple goalies, kind of throughout the playoffs, and sort of leaving in doubt who was starting game to game. That is not your father's hockey. Let's say that is not what the game was when I was a little kid. Growing up with it, it was you knew who every team's goalie was, and unless they were injured, that goaltender was going to be in there. But this team has gone through spells, including their Stanley Cup run and final run in 2010, where they're playing multiple goalies and kind of not knowing who's going to start. And a guy gets hurt and another guy has to step up. So it's not really it's not the death sentence for a team that it used to be, because we saw it last year with the Edmonton Oilers, and we've seen it in the past. We've seen other teams recently playing multiple goaltenders in playoff runs. So I think what the Flyers hope is that Dan Vladar brings the best out in Ersson, because he doesn't have to worry about the workload of a starting goaltender. And really, when you look at last year, it kind of became clear, like, it's Ersson or there's a chance we're not competitive. I don't think that's going to happen this year. So I think what happened, and you even heard it in Sam Ersson speaking last year, it was he felt the pressure to play every game. Maybe he hurried himself back from an injury or two over the last couple years. And then the coach, rightfully so, was talking about the goaltending situation on a fairly regular basis because he got asked about it. So that can only build pressure, and I think this Dan Vladar move takes some of that off, and I think that'll help Sam Ersson, and I think that's really what the Flyers' goal was, to help him out and maybe get back to the guy who was, as Danny Briere put it to us a couple years ago, he was pushing Carter Hart for starts before any of the legal stuff and the leave of absence took place with Carter. Ersson was pushing him for starts, and I think that's the guy the Flyers want to see if they can kind of rediscover.
I think Ersson just getting into a rhythm could be huge too. Last year, early on, he had 3 instances of that lower body injury, so it clearly was nagging. I don't think he felt all the way there, or at least when he did, it cropped up again. I think if he can just stay healthy and get into an early rhythm in the season, he won't feel like he's coming back constantly, which would be huge.
And the one thing we know about goaltenders is lower body injuries that start early in the season don't get better, because it's the most crucial spot for a goaltender. And, you know, you can't expect that the guy's going to get healthy while also playing. So I think they're trying to avoid that as well.
And I think the Flyers would just love almost league average goaltending. Like, we're not trying to pick on it, but like, look at the numbers last year, last in the league in save percentage. The year before that, tied for less. Like, that's just not going to cut it. And this was on a John Tortorella team that clearly wanted to prevent shots, and they did. Look at the metrics. Look at the numbers. They were a team that was defense first, prevent shots, make life easier on the goaltender, and they just still didn't get the goaltending. So it's been a problem.
They had some of the top shot blockers in the league. So the guys went out there with the focus of, let's try to keep the puck away from the net. And the numbers still were what they were. So it really became a disaster. There's not really any other way to sugarcoat that. It became a disaster. They want to recapture the good Sam Ersson. Dan Vladar has been a reliable backup starter when needed in this league. And they hope that there's not that pressure of, if I'm out, we're not going to be competitive in games, so let me rush myself back. So if there is an injury, we can make sure that situation is healed before rushing back, re-aggravating it, causing an even bigger issue, and all the while playing guys who are marginally NHL goaltenders at best at this point in time. I'd be surprised if Kolosov was here, and then Fedotov is. I think what we know what we have with Fedotov. as weird as that sounds to say, is I feel like the known quantities are Vladar and Fedotov. I don't think that we know exactly the quantity of Ersson, because we've seen his best in certain situations, and then we've seen what happens if he plays too much or maybe hurries back from injuries. So I don't know that Sam Ersson is a known quantity yet. And I think the Flyers want to find that out this season.
Absolutely.
They have to. It's a contract year.
Yeah, you're right. They do. And for some other guys too, like Ivan Fedotov and Alexei Kolosov, both are in contract years, and I think they're trying to figure if they're NHL goalies and where they stand. And Joe, what did you think of Danny Briere really challenging the goaltenders at the end of the season? I liked it. He basically divulged that he met with all of them and said, guys, I'm going to bring in outside help. It hasn't been good enough. You better be ready to compete come training camp next season. And I like that, because I don't want to say the goaltenders here have been coddled a little bit, but I think there was often excuses of, well, they're all young or they weren't ready for this position yet. At the end of the day, this is the NHL and you're playing for an NHL team, and it simply was not good enough.
Yeah, and there was a lot of okay, Fedotov's circumstances coming over here. And while that is, I'm not trying to diminish what that is.
Yeah.
But it's also professionals with contracts for a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And, Danny recognizes the situation. Contract years are coming up. And quite frankly, where this team is in the rebuild, it is time they have to find stability, because none of the other stuff around is going to work if the goaltending was the way it was last year. It doesn't matter how great Zegras is, or how much of a step Mishkov takes, or what kind of season Konechny has. If the goaltending is the way it was last year, there's games that they're just not going to be competitive in. Mm-hmm. And I think what Danny Briere realizes is that where they are in the rebuild, one of the biggest next step is getting, as you said, at worst, league average goaltending. They didn't get that last year, and he knows it's time, because for this team to take any steps forward, the goaltending just simply can't be what it was last year.
I agree, and you hit the nail on the head. It's not diminishing the stories behind these players. Like, Ivan Fedotov's story is remarkable. There's a reason why I voted for him to be the Flyers Masterton nominee. Samuel Ersson has overcome injuries. He was a 5th-round pick. He's really climbed.
And he's dealt with adversity. Like, his whole start to his career has been filled with adversity.
Yep.
Expecting to be this, then being completely relied on to be the starter. I mean, that is not a normal start to a career. So all of these guys have stories, and that's really the point we're trying to make is, anybody that gets to this level is facing a certain level of adversity, some more so than others. But there comes a point where it's time.
Right. It's a results business, and this is the big leagues, and guys, guys lose jobs if their teams don't perform. So I think Briere was at a point where he had to challenge his goaltenders and tell them, and he was transparent. I think that, which was good. It was like, I'm going to bring in outside help. He did in Dan Vladar. But I think he's still allowing them to compete. And he's still, all three of those, Ersson, Fedotov, and Kolosov, all three of those guys are in a position still to compete, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. And competition, I think in any sport, competition fuels these guys. We talked about over the last couple seasons, and more so when Carter Hart was still in the fold, we always talked about how, hey, when you see Ersson play this great, does that motivate you to go out and match it or be better? Mm-hmm. Those conversations haven't been as plentiful during last season. They just weren't, because they weren't competitive.
Yeah.
In the games that Ersson played, few and far between were games they were competitive in. And I think that, again, became a trickle down. And I think the pressure landed on Ersson, and it was pressure he really wasn't expecting to face. You can tell a goaltender that you're going to be leaned on to be the starter before the season, and they can assign a certain level of pressure to that. But then when you start getting into the season and the games that you don't play a lot of times aren't competitive, the pressure just mounts. And when you're injured and it's this guy or this guy every night, and option one is no better than option two on a lot of nights. I think that he put a lot of pressure on himself to come back. And I feel like you sensed it when you heard him talk, and then maybe he wasn't fully ready to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it was a trickle down effect that really, like I said earlier, turned into a disaster that the Flyers really can't afford to have go on anymore. And I think that's why Danny Briere did what he did.
Joe, I don't think the goaltending situation is perfect by any means right now. Of course it's not. It's still a question, I think, going into the season, but I do think it's better. Last year, you had Ivan Fedotov, who essentially was a rookie. Alexei Kolosov, inexperienced rookie who hadn't made his debut yet. And then you had Samuel Ersson going into his first full year as a number one. He battles injuries, kind of like a perfect storm. Do you think it's better right now on paper than it was last year going into the season?
I do, because you have a guy that's played 30 games in the league.
Yeah.
You have a guy that the Flyers liked enough to give him a multi-year deal. As we said, the guy who hasn't played for the team yet has the most security of any of the goaltenders. And I think there's a reason for that. I feel like that's a steadying ship. Whereas, if things start to go awry, you have Vladar there to put in, and you have a good idea you're going to compete in games, which was competitiveness was far too elusive for them last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that in itself makes it so much better. If you have a healthy Sam Ersson, which we've seen when there's not the pressure to play what your traditional starting goalie would play, which I'm not even sure what that is now, because around the league, you don't really have that many bell cows that you just go to. It's what? Bobrovsky, it's
Hellebuck.
It's Hellebuck, it's Bobrovsky, it's Vasilevsky, who's also faced injuries. So you're not looking around the league and saying, well, that guy plays 70 games. It's not that NHL anymore. So we've seen that they've gotten the best out of Ersson when he isn't the only go-to guy. And I think this is head and shoulders above what it was last year.
Yeah, you can even just look at the projected depth chart and you can tell it's deeper. I mean, Ivan Fedotov going into last year was the backup. This year, he's very much pegged to go to the Phantoms if he doesn't get claimed off of waivers. Alexei Kolosov was the 3. Now he's maybe even the number 4. So I do think there's more depth. There's a little more security, I think, in terms of like feeling safe that you have more options. But still big questions, though. Can Samuel Ersson be the number 1? Can he go a full season staying healthy and be relied upon? And what is Dan Vladar going to provide? Can he play more than he did in Calgary? Those are big questions, but I think at least it looks better going into the season.
Yeah, I definitely think it looks better, and guys tend to perform in their contract years.
Yep.
The thing, I think that is a different kind of pressure on Ersson this year because of the contract year, and how he handles it really is going to, not to overstate it, but I think how he handles that pressure could really be a large part in defining this whole Flyer season.
Mm-hmm.
So, you kind of get to this point where you're like, okay, Zegras is going to bring offense. Konechny's bringing offense and Mishkov. You kind of know what you have defensively, sort of, aside from a few pieces that they want to see more of. And it's really about how much this goaltending will keep them in games. Because last year, Florida's a bad example because they played some of their best games against Florida last year. But last year, going into a game against a team like Florida, and I'm just going to use Florida because they won. If you didn't have Sam Ersson, I think you started to have questions. I know I did here getting ready for shows. You started to have questions of how many goals were going to be put up against this team. And that's the kind of stuff the Flyers want to and need to get away from to take the next step.
And my last question for you, we've talked so much about how they need more center depth. They need more talent down the middle. And I think they've tried to address that in the draft. They acquired Trevor Zegras. They're hoping that helps. Defense, plenty of competition there. But is goaltending still the make or break position? I think in my mind, it's an easy yes.
It's an easy yes, because again, the name of the game is to be a team like the Flyers has to be competitive in games in order to have a chance to win, because hockey is, out of all the sports, is the margin is usually the smallest, and it's about getting to crunch time in a competitive situation. And to me, the number one thing that breaks that down is goaltending. That's what happened last year. And while, they addressed the center position and maybe they didn't score enough, I think we all think that that's going to happen. And Mishkov's going to take a step. And Zegras obviously addresses that. And they picked up Christian Dvorak to play center, as a depth centerpiece. And maybe you have Noah Cates playing in more of where he's supposed to be in a lineup instead of up from where he's supposed to be. It's absolutely goaltending. And I think that'll make a lot of people, I might have rolled my eyes during this podcast saying that, but it's going to make a lot of people roll their eyes, but that still doesn't make it not true.
Yeah.
Anybody that's probably like 3 years older than me and older, they're the only people that know stability goaltending in this town.
Yeah.
You can say Hextall and all, but there was never the feeling that the team had when Bernie Parent was the goalie since Bernie Parent. Outside of maybe when Pelle Lindbergh was here, and that obviously ended tragically. But for an extended period of time since Bernie Parent, there has not been a feeling of stability. Like, if we're in a 1-goal game in the playoffs or we're in the third period, my guy's going to make all the stops. There hasn't been that feeling. And Ron Hextall is a great flyer, an all-time flyer. But people remember Claude Lemieux and the goal from the blue line. It broke a bunch of people's hearts in one of the years that they really had a chance to go to the Stanley Cup final and win during the Lindros years. And it still remains a topic. It went away for a little bit because Carter Hart got assigned with being the future of the franchise. But it's back. And, what I will say is, for the people that are rolling their eyes, goaltending, I don't think is as key to a playoff run as it was in the 90s. And in those days, I just don't think it is. Teams are used to playing 2 goalies, but in the same way it was in the 90s, bad goaltending can take you out of almost anything. And I think that's why it remains the number one concern.
It's a great point. Even Carter Hart only played in the playoffs once here. I think in his 6 seasons, he was here for parts of 6 seasons, played in the playoffs once.
In the bubble playoffs.
In the bubble.
Yeah.
So, this was a guy that was touted as the goalie of the future, and he had a lot of really good years. And we should
point out, unfairly.
Yeah.
He didn't come out and say he was the future. He didn't say that stuff about himself.
Yeah.
He was assigned that pressure because this town has been so starved for a goaltender that almost you just put him in the net and it's like, okay, our guy's there and that's our guy.
Yeah.
We can count on that guy. That is something that is the most elusive thing in the history of this franchise since 1967, is a guy to put in and say, that's our guy and he's got us.
It is a position that has certainly plagued the Flyers. Some questions definitely facing it going into the season. We'll see if Samuel Ersson and Dan Vladar can provide answers. We've predicted the Flyers lineup as we always do this offseason. We looked at the forwards in 2 separate podcasts. We looked at the defensive pairs in our most recent podcast before this one. And then, of course, goaltending. So we'll have more to cover here before training camp rolls around. But, Joe, thanks so much. As always, great to see you. Great to chat with you. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru. And Flyers fans, as always, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen. And we can't wait to talk to you next time.